There's just it's your fault. You've just accomplished too much. There's just too much to talk about. I want to talk to you about Captain America
Mm.
and the work that you did with Captain America. It must have been interesting, and I don't want you to answer yet. But even the racial components of Captain America that you had to deal with in those days, what was it like as a young man to try to, give that point of view as a white man? That must have been interesting.
Look! Look, the dynamic duo!
Interesting. It must have been ballsy for a 25-year-old to say, I quit Marvel and I'm going to go traveling. Like, geez,
Yeah.
that's pretty bold.
Well,
Did you think I can always come back? I'm just that great. They're gonna need me. Or
no,
did you think, well, this is just a temporary thing. I'm moving on with life.
yeah, that's what I thought. I traveled in Europe. I came back. I wrote a novel, which sold to Dell, which went into another printing.
That's right.
I got a contract for a second novel for Dell, which I was going to set in the then super new concept of the Silicon Valley. I live 45 minutes from the Silicon Valley. So
Interesting.
I knew a guy, there was a guy named Ted Richards who had done underground comics. Dope and Dan had been his character. And I knew he was working for Atari at that point. So I called up Atari, I called up uh, him and said, I have some questions about how everything works in this business. And he said, I don't know the answer to any of that, but why don't you come work for us?
That's right.
And and I said, well, because I'm writing a book. And he said, well, but we'll give you a computer. And this was 1982, and the computer was the Atari 8600, the little 64K of memory,
I remember that.
right? But it was a computer. I mean, there weren't
Oh,
computers.
in those days, forget
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, absolutely.
So I ended up giving the money back to Dell for the second book, and I went and did game design for Atari for 2 years. And in '84, I went down to San Diego to kind of see old friends. And while I was down there, both Shooter from Marvel and Dick Giordano from DC said, "Hey, would you like to come back and do something?" And I'm like, "No, no, I'm done with comics. I'm having a good time designing games with this hot new Atari thing." And went home. And on that Sunday night, my boss at Atari called me up and he said they just sold the company, and I think we're all going to get fired on Wednesday.
Oh no.
So on Monday, I called up Shooter and Giordano and I said, actually, I um and so it wasn't my plan to come back, but you got to do what you got to
It
do.
wasn't your plan to come back because you had moved on in your career. You're doing a great job with Atari, or because you had lost the passion for the comic books.
No, no, I still had the passion. And I love comic books. I loved them then and I love them now. But I was disappointed with the way the business, I was still young enough to get worried about how the business worked.
A lot of people
But
get burnt by the business aspect of it.
exactly, exactly. And so no, but I was just having a good time. I mentioned I had a good time writing comics. I was having a good time designing game stories.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if I had to go back to comics, which suddenly I did, it was not, it wasn't what I was planning to do, but I hadn't lost any interest in doing them. And so I came back then in '84 and did, the stuff I did in the '80s. And
Yeah, you didn't miss a
once
beat.
again tried to do the best I could, whatever.
Kevin, he answered. Unfortunately, you missed it, but you'll get a chance to catch it on the show. The questions about Batman and how he got into Batman and things like that. Um, anything else that you were thinking about asking or?
Actually, Mr. Steve, if I can, what are your thoughts on both DC and Marvel on a cinematic level for today's audiences, and what are your thoughts on what Marvel has done to Mantis?
Mm.
Um, well, I've generally been happy with the Marvel movies. Um, I'm in no way paid for my opinion on that regard. So when I've liked the movies, I've said so. When I didn't like what they did to Mantis, I have said so, you know. Um, I did ask James Gunn about it at after Guardians 2. Um, he said, "Well, I just needed a character who was like that." And on the one hand, I spent a long time creating a very distinct Mantis. And the fact that that is all was thrown away. The only thing that those two had in common was that they were both female.
Yeah.
Um, that's distressing to me. On the other hand, because he called her Mantis, I get royalties,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
right? So, I mean, there's good and bad in that whole thing. I wish he hadn't done what he did. But I like Pom Klementieff as Mantis in the movies. I like that character. It's just not my character.
It's just
Right.
And I created her and I worked with her for years, and so I feel fatherly
yeah.
to her, and am sorry that we didn't get to see the real character, but I love the Guardians movies. So what are you going to do?
My opinion on that is that you created such a complex and sophisticated and
Yes.
interesting character.
Yes.
And for me, with the upsetting thing is that they reduced that wonderfully fleshed out character into just almost a comic relief, and I didn't appreciate that. You had said something earlier, the generational growth that comics has had from a creator's point of view has been interesting to me because you have the Stan Lee era, which had sophistication. Then you bring in your era, that brings a different level of sophistication. And then it grows all the way until the modern day. I think the difference that bothers me a little bit is that while your era brought a higher degree of sophistication and storytelling, it was always with respect to A, the genre, and B, the characters.
Hmm.
You kept Captain America. Captain America may have grown, but it was Captain America growing. It got to a point where creators were able to say, you know what, I think Reed Richards is, and then they write their perception of Reed Richards or of a character, and that kind of took me away because I was losing the characters that I'd loved and fallen in love with. It took me away from reading modern comics, and from a cinematic point of view, some of the movies are just perfect. They're awesome. They're great. To me, the difference is when the closer you stick to the material, the more honest you are with the depiction of what the character was intended to be, the better the result. And that's been my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I might have a slightly larger view of the whole thing in that um, when I when I when I worked on the Nightman TV show, I had to audition for my own character, but I passed the audition. But I wrote in one of my scripts, I wrote, Nightman goes out the door and there's a crowd of people out there. And the showrunner sat down with me and he said, in television, you got to pay for everything. There's not a crowd of people out there. There's two people out there, because we don't want to have to pay 10 people to be extras, whatever. And that's so you're dealing with hard physical reality when you're filming stuff. And so I totally get it that when Kevin Feige started this whole thing, he was much more able to kind of keep it tied to what had gone before and build the universe, build his own version of the universe. I think the problem came with the Disney Plus because WandaVision was great. And the next six things that came out of there were not great. They were like, okay, I think Feige, in order to come up with content, kind of talked to people that he liked, and he said, "You do your version of the She-Hulk, or you do your version of Moon Knight, or whatever." And so he lost that ability to kind of shape the whole thing. And then it turned out they weren't very good. Not everybody, you know, oddly enough, doing comics is actually a thing. Just because you can do a cool independent movie doesn't necessarily mean that you can do a comic book movie and make it work.
Absolutely.
And so, I think and then they were coming out too fast, and so the CGI wasn't catching up. So I'm really glad that they took a year off or whatever and did massive reshoots on Captain America, whatever, Captain America 4, um, to try to get it back to where it was supposed to be. But I know no more about these movies than you do. I mean, they don't consult. If they read something that I wrote, I'll get a screen credit, special thanks to whatever.
Wow.
But so they're good about that. And if it's a character I created, I get royalties, right? But they never call up and say, "Well, what did you have in mind here?" or how would you think we should solve this problem?
Interesting.
So I I think now, and again, I mean, again, well, I don't need to do it again. I think I've gone through it, but and the other thing I did notice early on in the movies was with comics, there's a certain rhythm. You hit things. It's fast action. It's dialogue. There are different beats in a movie. In a 2-hour movie, things are going to break differently. And so, I mean, one thing I noticed was in fights in comics, people are thinking the whole time. They've got good visuals, but they're thinking about what they're doing.
Thinking and talking.
Right. And that stuff is not happening in movies, right? They're different. And I accept that. I accept the fact that you're writing a story and you need this particular character and you decide, for whatever reason, you're going to take this other character and turn her into that or whatever. That I understand that, it's even if it doesn't necessarily work for me, I get that. So I think, but I do wonder because when we're talking now in the end of March of 2025, for the first X number of years that there were Marvel movies out there, everybody was like really excited about Marvel movies. Let's do that. And then they kind of like, the Disney Plus stuff, the bad CGI that just it kind of dampened it down. And either they're going to get that back or they're not, you
Correct.
know. And
Correct.
we're at the stage where we don't really know how that's going to go. I thought for a long time superhero movies were just going to be like a genre, like romance movies or crime movies or whatever, that there would just always be them. But it is possible to kill that off if they don't pull
If
it
they're
together.
not careful
And
with it. Yeah.
and that's the Marvel end of things. DC they haven't had a good movie in a long time, in my opinion. You know, I'm hopeful because I like James Gunn, and I'm hopeful that Superman this summer, with co-starring Guy Gardner, another of my guys, I'm hopeful that that'll be good and that DC will run with it for a while and that they'll have stuff going on. But I don't know that either, right? So I'm
None of
just
us
a
do.
I'm just a consumer like everybody else at that point.
We're absolutely hopeful for that as well, and we're hoping that it's a success. But I can't help but ask the question, like, if you ever talk to James Gunn again, it's like, dude, why would you change the Superman? Why would you not give us like he understood enough to give us the red shorts and the red boots? Like, you
Yeah,
understand what we've been missing. So why would you then change the material of the costume and change the S? Like, why not? It's amazing to me. It's fascinating to me the reluctance of the Hollywood producers to give us precisely what we're looking for because when they do, the response is always positive. Like it's always, it defies expectations. For years, for decades, they wouldn't give us a Wolverine costume. When they
right.
finally did, it breaks every record. Like, why not stick to the source material? But that's just me. That's just my
Yeah, and I
complaint.
don't really have an answer for that other than, when they did Captain America in the 40s, they kind of wanted to do a kind of military uniform version of it with buckles and things like that. And
Yeah,
I think it became perceived wisdom in Hollywood that, yeah, it should be a different material and it ought to have
yeah, yeah,
buckles and it ought to have this and that
yeah,
because it's more realistic that way. Well,
yeah.
okay. But I hear you, your point is totally valid too, right? It's just that again, I'm just on the outside, just noticing this stuff, right?
Understood.
But
Have you, oh, forgive me, I'm jumping in, I'll finish your thoughts, but have you thought about, because you've actually worked in all three genres. You've worked in comics, movies, and TV. So you know the process, you know the system. Do you have a movie in your mind? Because even myself, and I'm not, Kevin and I, we talk about what our ideal Fantastic Four movie, and I've got that movie in my head. Do you have one in your head? And what is it?
as using
Like,
a
do you have
Marvel
a movie?
character
No,
or
in other words, have you thought about a movie, like a particular character that you would love to do as a movie? You've got the story in your head and you know exactly what the movie would. Yeah, or do you not do those exercises? Like
well, I do it for myself
that's what
basically.
I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't I just like, as it turns out, you heard my origin story, but as it turns out, I like to write. And so, even though I'm not doing comics now, I write scripts, either comics or film scripts, depending on what seems most likely, because they're very similar. Um, uh, you know, for my own amusement, for my own edification. I mean, the most famous now, because I've talked about it in a number of interviews, but I wanted to do a story for a long time. I wanted to do a story that was like a small town uh, with 20 different characters in it, all of whom had their own stories. Each, they're all happening parallel to each other. And there's crime stories, and there's romance stories, and there's espionage stories, and there's, all these different things are happening in this town. And then two of those people get superpowers, but I
Hmm.
don't tell you which two. So
Hmm.
you're following these 20 people, and you know that one of them, one of the men and one of the women has got a secret identity, which is the name of the thing, secret identities. Um, but I don't tell you who. Halfway through the run, I do tell you who because you want to be able to see it through their eyes. But in the beginning, it's a mystery. Um, and but that's a lot, to like work that out. 20 stories, you can't have all the climaxes at the same time.
I
Things have got to
understand.
balance, right? So along came this thing called a pandemic. And like everybody else, I had a lot of time to sit around and do, whatever. So I wrote this thing and I just told you what I wanted to do. And eventually, I did it. And only then did I go, well, the only way that I made this work was it's 7 60-page graphic albums from beginning to end, right? Which means 420 pages. And I said, there's nobody in the world, now that George Perez is dead, there's nobody who's going to draw this.
Perez, rest in peace. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's going to draw this ever. And so it sits there as these scripts, 420-page script. And I really like it. And I really think I think it went great. I think it would make a great thing. But um, who's going to draw it? And for a while, there was talk about making it because Netflix was buying everything. And it's like, well, let's turn it into a Netflix movie. But then
Or series, or series. It
a
sounds like a
series, yeah.
yeah.
But then, you've got to pay 20 people, like the Nightman story that I gave you before. You got to hire all these people and pay them. So, I mean, that could all happen. It could all work, but um, so far, nobody has said I will draw 420 pages, and nobody has said, I will put together the budget where we can actually make this thing happen. But I'm very pleased with it, right? And there's other things that I've done like that are, that I like, but I am, for better or worse, a product of a system in which they said, you're going to write Captain America, Sal Buscema is going to draw it, we're going to publish it and get it out there. So I did not come from an era where, you get together with the artist and you go, hey, how about you and me go in and pitch
Yeah.
this thing, right? And so, and a lot of people, my contemporaries, are no longer with us, or no longer, I mean, there's all that going on too. So I don't I write these things without expectation that they're ever going to be printed or filmed or whatever. But I'm having a good time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm doing I'm writing these things that are interesting to me that I think that, I said when we started this, I had certain standards and I think they meet those standards and so on and so forth. But getting them actually into your hands is something that I don't have a real easy road to make that happen. So I'm again, I'm happy with making myself happy, and that's good.
I, I'm
Yeah,
I'm a big believer in that. And by the way, both Kevin and I, we live our lives the same way. So in my head, every night before I go to bed, I'm writing a movie in my head. That's how I fall asleep. And I've written a novel, and I think the work is gratification in and of itself, and I'm happy with it. And so whatever happens with it, is gravy. If it
yeah.
becomes a bestseller, great. If it doesn't, I'm happy. And I think
Well,
there's gratification in the work.
I hope that it does. And again, from my standpoint, I'm fortunate enough because of these movies and stuff that I don't have to sell this thing in order to pay the rent, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but whenever I'm talking to people who are still trying to pay the rent, doing a job, whatever, I can't just say, oh, well,
I understand.
whatever.
I understand.
If
But
if
the
you have to
era,
sell it, you have to sell it, but I don't have to sell it. So.
with respect to what you said earlier, it is a different era now, and
Yeah,
artists are all collaborating in a different way than they used to back in the day.
right.
And instead of being paired up with Sal Buscema, artists are pairing up, and there are so many more available, accessible right now that. Yeah, you could find someone to draw a 400 something page. You'd find a lot of people who would be ecstatic to work with Steve Englehart with a story that he came up with. And so it's a realistic dream that
Well,
we
if
can
you
do.
run into one or if somebody's listening to this,
Kevin, we'll earn a job, and let's try to see if we can
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
find.
Believe me. We'll
but
put it out there.
you mentioned way early on you were going to ask me about contemporary stuff, and the answer to that is I'm not really following contemporary stuff. When I
Ah.
got out of comics in 2006 or 7, the last time I went through there, I got a 3-book deal from Tor, and so I really turned my head toward prose, writing how do you write prose novels, and just didn't really look at comics for a long time. And then the other thing was I found, somebody'd go up and they go, "You really need to read this thing. This is really good." And I'd go
Mm,
to the comic book store and there wouldn't be any copies left. It had all sold out, right? Because they didn't order extras. They ordered however many had been asked for, whatever.
interesting.
So it became hard for me to drop back in and get on to something. So it just in general, I'm not following what's going on
Interesting.
in comics today. And
Interesting.
Well,
part of that, I mean, I understand old people. It's not like it was when in my day. It's not so much that, it's just I turned my attention away from it and it's been hard to turn back again.
Right. Kevin,
well,
you got a question?
if I may ask, um, to piggyback on what you just said, have you ever considered writing for a title like The Shadow or The Green Hornet or one of the um, pulp novel style, but the ones that are done for today?
Um, well, I don't know if it was done for today, but 10 years ago or so, somebody did a book with new stories about the spider, who I always
I,
really liked. I love the
yeah.
spider. And I wrote one of those and really liked. I thought it felt like the spider to me. Um, but no, and just to piggyback on all of that, Marvel's been doing this thing apparently where they go to people and they say, you wrote this character 40 years ago, come back and write a miniseries about that character or whatever.
Hmm.
I know Daniel Chichester has done Daredevil, and Ann Nocenti has done some Ms. Marvel and stuff like that. And they asked me, but I thought, how would I do, for example, Captain America today? If I were going to do Captain America today in real time with Trump as president and all that kind of stuff,
I was
it's
going to
like
ask you.
it would be a very different character. And if it's a very different character, then what's the point? Why have me do it?
But I don't know how you feel about it, but it's funny because reading your Captain America storyline, I find a lot of correlation to today's day and
Oh,
age.
absolutely. And
And Captain America's disillusion with America, the government, the system. I could imagine that story literally being applied to today.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's weird again, having been around here now for nearly 78 years. I thought that whole thing with Nixon was like a one-off. I thought, we came close to doing something bad there, but we
Yeah,
solved
we
it,
dodged a bullet. Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea that we would be where we are now not only didn't occur to me for a very long time, it distresses me in the moment. But it's like,
So it's an interesting thing because, you're always careful to talk politics with anyone because you don't want to go
yeah,
there because you never know what they're going to say. But I knew that we could talk with that with you because, again, and while Kevin was gone, you introduced really nuanced and complex stories, ideas, thoughts, philosophies in your writing, particularly with Captain America, dealing with the racial dynamics of that comic book, the
mm,
relationship between Captain America and the Falcon. That's a very, very complex relationship. And then Captain America's perception of that relationship as opposed to the Falcon's perception, because they were kind of butting head and your storylines. And then Captain America's discovery about the how the government works. And oh my God, I could imagine not only that storyline being applied to it, being adapted as a modern movie. That's what I would do as a producer. I would take that storyline and
mm,
translate that story into a modern movie. But also, I could also imagine being you and saying, "Oh my God, this is what I would do with Captain America under this circumstance." You know what I mean?
yeah. It's just, well, as I said, the idea of coming back and trying to write characters that I wrote 50 years ago didn't, I would have to like either make it very palatable, and not challenge too much because it's a nostalgia kind of trip for everybody, or I'd have to totally reimagine everything, and then, it's like if I were going to do that, I'd probably want to like write the regular series and again, I come from an era when you took on a book, you wrote it until you keeled over or whatever. I mean, it's like the idea of, oh, I'll just do 12 issues here and then leave. It's like none of that stuff is like right in my wheelhouse. I'm again, only with having a long period of time can you build complex things and do stuff. Um, so as far as race goes, I mean, in the 70s, there was black consciousness, there was women's consciousness, there was the Vietnam War, anti-war consciousness. The only thing we were missing, we didn't have gay consciousness, particularly,
Mm.
that was well known at that time. I mean, it wasn't a thing. Um, and for whatever reason, I really like characters. When I do a character, I try to get inside that person's head. I distinctly remember when they gave me Captain America and I went home that night, I remember saying, if I were Captain America, what would I do here? And it's not that like every one of my characters is really me. It's no, it's like I'm really them,
I
It's like
understand.
how would I do that if I were Captain America? Um, and the Falcon had been the sidekick, had been the partner, whatever. I don't recall anything too earth-shaking having been done with the Falcon. He just was there. But I thought, well, he's Captain America's partner. He should do stuff. And I had the typical young person's consciousness in the 70s of black situation, women's situation, whatever. Having said that, so I mean, so I did my best, right? I mean, I tried to make the Falcon a credible black man, and and his girlfriend and the boss and the in Harlem and all that. I tried to write them as like real people to the best of my ability. Having said that, when I got Luke Cage,
Mm.
Billy Graham, who was black, who was involved with the thing all the way along, even though George Tuska was penciling it, Billy was doing the covers and he was doing a lot of the inking. Um, he very kindly sort of sat me down over a period of time and said, "Let me explain how this works," you know? So I got better at writing black people, you know?
Interesting.
And uh I mean, I'm not a woman either, you know, and I'm not gay either. I mean, it's like so I'm in all those things, I'm doing my best to do it right, right? But it all depends on how much I know and how much I, can really get in my brain about stuff.
Yeah.
Um, you know, John Stewart later, I mean, benefits from all of that. It's just, I think I can write a credible black man, you know? I think I can write a credible woman, credible gay woman. I mean, it's just like whatever you try to get inside that head. Um, but I mean, I reference John Stewart because again, John Stewart, when I took over Green Lantern, John Stewart he was the Green Lantern because Hal Jordan had quit, but everybody knew Hal Jordan was going to come back and then John Stewart would leave like he always did.
Mm.
And I thought, why does he have to leave? Why can't
Mm.
there be two of them, you know? And then why can't there be three of them? And then that led to the team and all that. But it's like, if I'm going to write a character, I want to do that character to the best ability. I don't want to have some of my characters just kind of stand in the background all the time and like well then what are they there for, right?
Yeah.
Um uh so
No, but
you know
we want you to know that
and
as an audience, we picked up on that and we appreciate it. It isn't to say that mistakes weren't made, that things were perfect, but I, as a reader, definitely. I mean, you took bold chances. You had a Captain America run where there was no Captain America. It was pretty much the
right.
Falcon for like 2, 3 issues. Those are bold steps, and even if you're coming at it from almost a little bit of an outside point of view, you don't know exactly what life is like in Harlem. You presented Harlem. You presented. So I remember as a kid being into comics and reading comics and not discovering black characters, someone that I could relate to. And I remember discovering and seeing a Luke Cage comic, and I didn't understand that it was a racial component, but it was oh my God, I see myself on a subconscious level.
Hmm.
And it had a positive impact on me. So yeah, I certainly picked up on that in your writing, both with John Stewart, with Sam Wilson, and you name it. So kudos to you for that. Kudos to you
Right.
for that. What's your so a couple of other questions, and Kevin, forgive me, I dominate. So one of the things that's important, and as a writer, comic book writer, is the collaboration with the artist. And you've
Right.
had some great collaboration. I mean, obviously, you started off working as an assistant with Neil Adams, with don't get Kevin started on Neil Adams, Sal Buscema. So who's your favorite artist collaborator? You've worked a lot with Sal, and Sal's work is just, I had a chance to talk to him. So who's your favorite? How much thought did you give into being a writer and being paired with an artist that's not able to tell you the story that you'd like to tell?
Well, that didn't happen very often. It did happen sometimes, because we were just assigned our partners, but most people in the business were professionals and could hold up their end of the whole thing. Um, I, I said I was given complete creative freedom, but there are some artists who like can't draw horses or you can't draw hands or whatever. Sal could draw anything, and then I was extremely lucky that I got to start both Captain America and the Defenders with Sal, right? Because it's like I get to do whatever I want to do. But if I try to do it and the artist goes, well, I really don't, I can't do that sort of thing, and I have to start cutting and, shaping to fit the artist. Never came up with Sal. And with most people it never came up, but I really do appreciate how much of, what I was able to do all started because I got Sal Buscema as the artist. I much prefer Sal to his brother. I mean, his
Oh,
brother's
really?
his brother is like a more illustrative artist, and his brother's was great, did great stuff. And Sal was always a little more comic booky and a little more, but he could draw anything. And you never heard a peep with you'd say, well, let's do this weird thing. And he'd just draw it, you know. And I love guys like that because again, I was in my brain, I thought I was going to be an artist. And I do think that I'm good at writing for artists because I can visualize how the stuff can be done. Not that I expect it to be done that way, not that I would, you know, but I know I'm not asking for anything that I couldn't draw, except I haven't drawn in 50 years now. But I would understand. I think I understand what an artist does. And so I preferred Marvel style, which they don't do anymore at either Marvel or DC. But I liked it because in Marvel style, you would give the artist a rundown, a synopsis of what the story was, but let him figure out how he was going to tell it
I
visually.
was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
And I love that. I want an artist to feel like he's a contributor to this whole thing, and not just replicating my vision of the whole thing. Um, Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes you can get back art that really missed the point, didn't do it right, and then you earn your money as a writer where you kind of like um, work around that. I've told this story before, so I'm not, you know, dumping on anybody who's also not here anymore. But on Luke Cage, I would work out stories and I would send them to George Teska, and George Teska would go, yeah, that's too much work. I'm going to do something else. And I would get back all the pages all drawn, but Luke Cage would be doing stuff that Luke Cage would never do. And what I learned was, and I really, this is all part of being a writer. I learned that even though Luke Cage would never do that, it was my responsibility to explain to you why he did that, and,
Fascinating.
and I found that you could sort of explain anything, you could sort of figure out how to make it work so that it went, and that was good training. I didn't enjoy it at the time,
Yeah, I don't imagine. Yeah.
but it was good training for, just like, yeah, you don't have to, if you go into a blind alley, you can find a way to get out of there. um, and so and I did some Batman stuff in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, not with Marshall Rogers, with somebody else. And all of his art, people just were like statues. It was all heavy and it didn't move at all. And it's like, okay, well, but and it's Batman, so I've got to make it look good because people are going to expect something, from me on Batman. So, you run into that every once in a while, but mostly people not only were totally competent to do what they were supposed to do, but they were enjoying doing it. And so, a lot of those books came out because we were both, whoever we were at the time, we were enjoying doing the comics and we were putting our best into it.
Did you continue to work in the bullpen, or we talked to Roy Thomas, for example? By the way, John Buscema, Sal Buscema. I can't, I don't know who's my favorite because I love me some John Buscema as well.
Yeah.
But Roy Thomas would explain, his process, and he talked about one time. I think John Buscema had sent him a page. Was it John Buscema? I forget, Kevin. And he said he was so mad that he scratched across the page and sent it back, and he
It
regretted.
was done.
Yeah, he regretted
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
was, were you in the bullpen? Were you able to have, because another thing that we talked to John Romita, Roy Thomas Sr., I talked to John Romita, Kevin didn't get a chance to do that. And John would explain to me how Stan Lee would like tell him the story and jump up on the desk and like make the pose and like kind of talk the story out. And John would go home and forget half the things that Stan Lee said and draw what he barely remembered. And then
Yeah.
Stan Lee would do what you just talked about doing, which is fixing it back into the mold that he wanted to do. What was your process? Were you shipping, like Roy Thomas, the material to your artists? Were you in the same room with them? Were you having the conversation? How did you do it?
Well, when I was in the bullpen, I stayed in the bullpen for like a year once I started writing. I also moved closer to the city, so I didn't have to take a 2 hour train
Hours.
ride in and out every day. Um, uh, so I was doing the Hulk with Herb Trimpe, who was in the next cubicle over, right?
That's
I
another
was,
thing. The Hulk, unbelievable.
yeah, and I didn't do anything with Johnny, but I mean, Johnny was just, he was a friendly guy. He was, so that was all cool. So I was there, working with Herb. I could walk around the corner and talk to Herb about what we were doing on the Hulk. The rest of the books, my artist was not readily to hand. And then after about a year, I was writing full time, so I gave up the staff job and wrote from home. Um, Still had to come into the city now and again, but didn't have to do it every day. Um, but yes, it was all, in 73, I moved out to California. And we were mailing the original art back and forth, right? I mean, on extremely rare occasions, you might get a set of Xeroxes of the art, but basically, you got the art and you indicated on the art with a blue pencil where the balloons were going to go, and then you sent that to the letterer, and then he did his thing and he sent it to the colorist, and that's how the process worked, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So now, of course, it's totally different because you've got all the
Of
electronic
course, of
ways of
course.
doing this stuff. Um, I wrote four Vampirella, and the fourth one got lost in the mail, and that's when I learned always make a backup. That's another
Yes,
lesson, another lesson for a young writer, right?
indeed.
That said, we never lost anything. And that original art would go from New York to California and back to New York, or maybe to someplace else, wherever the inker was. Um, we never lost anything. So that's good, and and it worked out. Um, but a story in line with what you were saying about Johnny Romita. Um, when I did the first Giant Size Avengers, that sort of was the whole thing about we're finally revealing who Mantis is and all that. Dave Cockrum was assigned to draw that book, and he hadn't been involved with it. And I explained it all as best I could, knowing that he hadn't been involved with it. But still, from time to time, he had to make choices, and he didn't know everything that he was supposed to know. And I, in fact, um, to make the story work, cut up some of the original artwork and moved the panels around, which he hated me for the rest of his life.
Oh my God,
For screwing with his artwork. And I will say at that point, it was just the beginning of people being able to sell their art. So there
Oh,
was a financial component in there, but
oh,
I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about this story is so fucking complex,
yeah,
and
yeah.
how am I going to? I can't do it with the panels that are here. So I mean, I apologized to Dave, several times. I don't think he ever got over it.
He
He
should
had
have
a
gotten over it because he didn't deliver what you want. You actually took some greater liberties, didn't you? At sometimes, on a couple of occasions, like replace and put your own art into a couple of pages and a couple of panels to
not
tell.
well, not so much replace, but I mean, sometimes I needed another panel in a conversation. I can remember there was something in a Captain America, right? There was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I needed another panel, and so I don't know. I can't remember on this case whether I cut that stuff up and just pasted the new panel in, or whether I, sort of worked out the new panel and sent it along to be pasted in at some point. Um, I still thought enough like an artist to be comfortable doing some art if I needed to.
Yeah.
But that was never my first, I mean, I didn't look for ways to do that. It was just like if the
No, I
story just
understand. Yeah,
required it,
I
then
understand.
then that's what I did. But I mean, I do know that Dave Cockrum in particular, just he did not like the fact that I had taken scissors to his pages, and it's like I get that, but what am
Hey,
I?
listen.
I'm doing a conclusion to this massive Mantis story.
And he's no longer with us
I
also.
can't be stopped here.
I completely understood. I agree with you. Your side. We lost Dave Cochran as well. I
Yeah,
believe we lost
yeah.
him. Kevin, did you have any other thoughts or questions?
Basically, I'm okay. I am in comic book heaven right now.
Steve, listen, it's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm sure I've got a million questions, but I'm going to respect your time, and hopefully that will mean that you have a friend with us,
Yeah,
and we could come back and have another conversation. Hopefully, this was enjoyable to you. Hopefully,
yeah,
you get the energy that we feel towards you. And I'm going to go back and reread. I'm guilty. In those days I was mostly nowadays I'm a Marvel DC person, there's no distinction, but in those days for whatever reason I was exclusively Marvel. So I'm gonna check out some of your DC work to see, just to enjoy it. As I said, going back as an adult and rereading this material, I am more impressed than I was even back then. So kudos to you for being just a legend, and for bringing so much joy to so many people. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
One more time, Mr. Englehart, thank you so, so much.
you are welcome. You guys are both welcome, and I'm glad that it all came out this way.
Wonderful.